A tank fortress designed to make entire armies flee at the mere sight of it. The only one of its kind in the world, top secret, with 2 cannons and a crew of 7 men. Its armor was impervious to shells, and its name was a symbol of power. But its real combat career lasted only 72 hours, ending in disgrace in an icy grave in no man's land. What if I told you that the engineers who created this monster knew about its fatal flaw even on the drawing board? That the main reason for its demise was so obvious that Stalin himself personally warned about it, only to be ignored? And that in the end, dozens of soldiers paid with their lives trying to recover this useless heap of metal? What was the most expensive and shameful failure in Soviet tank building? The story of a machine that turned out to be the perfect weapon against itself. You'll learn how designers, defying common sense, stubbornly created an overcomplicated monster, while its modest, single-turreted rival, the future legendary KV, was already waiting in the wings. We'll show how 3 days of supposed triumph turned into months of shame, and how one fateful explosion on a deserted road buried an entire era in the history of warfare for good. Why did the generals give an order that cost many lives just to recover useless wreckage that no one needed? And what one simple, brilliant idea, voiced at the very top, could have saved the project, but was rejected? This isn't just a story about a failed tank. It's a tale of blindness, stubbornness, and the high price of an engineering mistake. Ready to learn how steel legends are born and die? Then watch till the end. This was the tank that was meant to be the pride of an empire and the terror of its enemies. The world's only experimental giant with 2 turrets and a crew of 7 men. Its armor shrugged off enemy shells, and its guns crushed fortifications. But its combat career lasted a mere 3 days, ending in disgrace in an icy crater near Vyborg. Why did the USSR's most expensive and secret project turn into a helpless target? The reason was so absurd they'd been warned about it at the drafting table. To understand the origins of this colossus, you have to go back to the dust and heat of the Spanish Civil War. There, on the battlefields, Soviet military observers watched with alarm as their light tanks, the T-26 and BT-5, considered state-of-the-art, were turned into scrap metal. Anti-tank guns of just 37 millimeters easily punched through their thin armor like tin cans. It became clear all of the Red Army's tanks were hopelessly obsolete. But the most painful problem concerned heavy machines. The flagship of Soviet tank building, the 5-turreted giant T-35, turned out in practice to be a helpless parade monster. Its 25mm armor was no longer protection, and its 50-ton weight made it a slow-moving, clumsy target. It was impossible to reinforce the armor. The design couldn't handle it. They had to start from scratch. In 1938, the country's leadership gave designers a clear and ambitious task: create a new heavy breakthrough tank capable of independently assaulting the enemy's most powerful fortified lines. The work was entrusted to 2 Leningrad factories, sparking a quiet but fierce rivalry. At the Kirov plant, a team led by Joseph Kotin began work on the SMK project, named after Sergei Kirov. In parallel, at Factory 185, Semyon Ginsburg's team was creating an almost identical copy, the T-100 tank. Both projects were as alike as twin brothers and were inspired by the old but still popular idea of multi-turreted vehicles. The initial concept for the SMK was downright frightening: 3 turrets, armed with 3 guns of different calibers and 8 machine guns, operated by a crew of 7. This floating fortress was supposed to weigh nearly 60 tons and have armor up to 75 millimeters thick. The ideas, blueprints, and calculations were ready, but to turn them into metal, they needed the approval of the man whose word was law, and his verdict would surprise everyone.
Bringing their ambitious vision to life was impossible without the highest approval. To make a powerful impression, Joseph Coton's team took an unconventional step. In just 2 weeks, working around the clock, they didn't just prepare blueprints, they built a colossal, life-sized wooden mock-up of the 3-turreted tank. This skillfully crafted prop, striking with its menacing shape and size, was meant to vividly demonstrate the power of Soviet design. The decisive showing took place on December 9, 1938, in the Kremlin office, where members of the Politburo and the top military brass gathered. The center of attention were the 2 rival projects, the SMK and the T-100. However, the final word, as always, belonged to one man, Joseph Stalin. Having carefully studied the impressive mock-up, delivered a verdict that left the designers in mild shock. He pointed out that the 3rd rear turret was an excess, needlessly weighing down the vehicle and complicating production. His proposal was simple and pragmatic: scrap it and use the saved weight to increase the thickness of the main armor. No one dared to argue. But within this seemingly rigid directive lay an unexpected loophole for creativity. The leader gave the green light for the parallel development as a risky experiment of another, radically simplified version of the vehicle with just a single turret. This unexpected outsider, perceived by many as secondary, received the modest name KV after Defense Commissar Kliment Voroshilov. With the highest sanction, but also strict deadlines, the 2 design bureaus plunged into a whirlwind of work. Now ideas had to be turned into living metal. The first and fundamental problem was the future giant's circulatory system, its engine. A 55-ton colossus required immense power. The choice seemed obvious: the powerful, proven, and available AM-34 aircraft engine, developing 850 horsepower and used to lift the heavy TB-3 bombers into the sky. However, this seemingly perfect power plant carried the seeds of future disaster. It was finicky, fuel-hungry, required high-octane gasoline, and most importantly, was monstrously flammable compared to the tank diesels that were just gaining popularity. One accurate hit from an enemy shell into the gas tank could turn the armored fortress into a fiery trap for the entire crew. But in the time crunch of 1939, they chose to overlook these risks, eager to get a finished prototype. Blueprints were revised, hammers rang out in the workshops, and soon the moment of truth arrived. Would this titanic creation of human mind and steel be able to not just stand, but move?
The trials, which began in August 1939, weren't just a technical check, but a true baptism by fire for all 3 vehicles. The proving ground became an arena where the steel giants had to prove their right to exist. They were driven over terrain rutted with tracks and gullies, forced to assault steep climbs and overcome deep ditches. Tracks churned mud, transmissions groaned under the strain, engines ran at their limit. The SMK, imposing and menacing, demonstrated its strengths from the first glance. Its powerful 76mm gun in the main turret and the 45mm gun in the second one fired accurately and far. Armor plates up to 75mm thick, as intended, proved invulnerable to fire from standard anti-tank weapons. It seemed the engineers had created the perfect fortress on tracks. But soon, the hidden rocks surfaced, problems invisible on paper, but catastrophic in reality. The chief among them was the machine's monstrous length. Stretched to almost 10 meters due to the two separated turrets, the SMK resembled a railroad armored car more than a tank. Its turning radius was huge. Maneuvering in tight spaces among forests or fortifications became a multi-step operation. However, the real hell was inside the steel hull. The crew of 7 men, commander, 2 gunners, 2 loaders, driver-mechanic, and radio operator, were trapped in cramped, roaring compartments. Conceived as an advantage, the 2-turret layout turned into a tactical nightmare. The commander, located in the main turret, was supposed to simultaneously observe the battlefield, select targets for 2 different guns, give commands to 2 gunners, and coordinate the actions of all 7 men. In the controlled chaos of the proving ground, this was already difficult. In real combat, under fire, in smoke, and from the concussions of nearby explosions, such a control system was doomed to fail. While the commander worked with 1 turret, the second lay idle, losing the initiative. In September came the moment of the highest evaluation. All 3 tanks, the SMK, the T-100, and the KV, were presented to the most important commission at the Kubinka Proving Ground. Among the spectators was Defense Commissar Clement Voroshilov and other top Army brass. The vehicles demonstrated mobility, firing, and cross-country capability. The compact, low-slung, and incredibly agile for its weight KV stood in sharp contrast to the clumsy, albeit better-armed, twin-turreted colossi. Opinions were divided. Some were impressed by the SMK's firepower, others by the KV's practicality and survivability. No final decision was made. Debates in offices could last forever. There remained only one merciless but utterly honest way to find the best: throw them all into the crucible of a real, not a training war. And fate soon provided that opportunity. The war for which these machines were created came much sooner than anyone expected. On November 30, 1939, the Soviet-Finnish Winter War began. An operation planned as a quick victory march quickly bogged down in the snows of the Karelian Isthmus before the formidable Mannerheim Line fortifications. Light T-26 tanks burned like torches, and medium T-28s couldn't get within effective firing range. The Red Army desperately needed a breakthrough weapon. Then, headquarters made an incredibly risky decision: immediately send the world's only experimental prototypes, the SMK, T-100, and KV, to the front for testing in real combat. It was a colossal risk. Losing any of the unique million-ruble tanks would mean the collapse of the entire project, but there was no other way. Since there wasn't a single tanker in the Army who knew how to operate these experimental monsters, crews had to be formed from the creators themselves. Volunteers were assembled into teams, workers and mechanics from the Kirov plant who had built these tanks with their own hands and knew every bolt. Lieutenant Peaton was appointed commander of the SMK crew, and factory driver-mechanic Vladimir Ignatiev took the controls. On December 10, 1939, the 3 steel giants arrived at the front in the area of the Finnish fortified district of Hotinen. On December 17th, they went into their first attack. The SMK, leading the column, had the effect of a bombshell. Shells from Finnish 37mm anti-tank guns clanged loudly off its frontal armor, doing no harm. The tank, like a prehistoric lizard, crawled slowly and inexorably forward, crushing barbed wire with its 55-ton mass and pushing aside granite anti-tank obstacles. The crews of the 2 turrets fired at the pillbox embrasures, and machine guns cut down Finnish infantry. It seemed the concept was working perfectly. But chaos was already growing inside the armored fortress.
Coordinating 7 men in tight quarters amidst the roar of their own guns and impacts on the armor proved even worse than on the proving ground. The commander physically couldn't handle managing 2 separate fire points. And on December 18th, the first serious breakdown occurred. From a nearby shell blast, the SMK's main turret traverse mechanism jammed. Now its most powerful 76mm gun could only fire straight ahead. The fearsome Titan was losing its teeth. And this was only the beginning of its troubles. The true catastrophe, which will forever inscribe its name in textbooks as an example of an engineering miscalculation, awaited it the next day, and the cause was not an enemy shell.
Dawn on December 19, 1939, found the SMK crew in a state of anxious exhaustion. Their machine, despite its impressive armor, was already wounded. The main turret, unable to rotate, stared rigidly forward. Nevertheless, the command, desperately needing any armor to exploit success, ordered the heavy tanks to attack again. And again, the damaged giant led the column. It was a mistake bordering on overconfidence. The tank slowly crawled into a narrow corridor punched through the Finnish defenses. Its long body was an ideal target for any flanking fire. Ahead on the road, driver-mechanic Vladimir Ignatiev spotted only a pile of abandoned wooden crates, the usual debris of a retreating enemy. He didn't even have time to react. The roar was deafening. A powerful, high-explosive charge, skillfully disguised under the wooden debris, detonated directly under the left track. The blast wave struck the multi-ton behemoth with earthquake-like force. Inside, the crew was deafened by the ringing in their ears and blinded by the sparks struck from metal against metal. When consciousness returned, the scene was horrifying. The left track was torn and hung limp. The idler wheel was blown to pieces, and the hull floor, the very protection against mines, was crumpled and buckled inward. The SMK helplessly tilted into a deep, smoking crater. The enemy had succeeded not with a shell, but with a cunning trap against which armor thickness was powerless. But the fight wasn't over. The T-100 heavy tank following behind displayed the highest courage and discipline. It didn't retreat. On the contrary, it placed its armored hull between the Finnish guns and the immobilized SMK, becoming a living shield. An unequal duel began. Finnish artillerymen, emboldened by success, unleashed a barrage of fire on the 2 tanks. Shell after shell struck the T-100's armor. During this battle, it would receive 7 direct hits, but it held. Meanwhile, the SMK crew, among whom there were already wounded, spent several hours under fire, attempting the impossible, to repair the destroyed running gear on the spot. Realizing the hopelessness, they made the hardest decision, to abandon their fortress. Through the narrow emergency hatches in the floor, all 7 men crawled into the already overcrowded T-100. 15 men found themselves locked in a cramped, smoky iron box, choking of cordite fumes and fear. And then fate struck another blow. From the constant jolting and overload, the T-100's engine stalled. It seemed the end. Now 2 unique vehicles and 15 men were doomed. But here, not only courage was shown, but supreme professional skill. The T-100's driver-mechanic managed under incredible conditions to start the engine using only one of the 2 failed magnetos. The engine coughed to life, running rough, but it ran. Slowly, under unceasing fire, the overloaded tank, like a wounded beast, began to back out of the trap. it would spend another 5 hours deep in enemy territory, fighting back with its last shells before finally breaking through to its own lines. In Moscow, in the offices of the People's Commissariat of Defense, the news of the SMK's fate had the effect of a bombshell. The loss wasn't just material, it was a blow to prestige. The unique, secret, one-of-a-kind tank into which colossal resources and hopes had been invested now stood as a monument to defeat in no man's land. A panicky thought arose. What if the Finns captured and studied the machine, gaining access to Soviet technological secrets, including that experimental torsion bar suspension? The head of the Armored Vehicle Directorate, Dmitry Pavlov, under pressure from above, gave a categorical and, as would soon become clear, horrifically consequential order. Organize an operation to recover the SMK at any cost. That cost would prove unbearably high.
The order from Moscow was carried out with frightening directness. To save one abandoned machine, an entire company of the 167th Motor Rifle Battalion was allocated, reinforced with sappers, anti-tank guns, and 7 T-28 tanks. Under the command of Captain Nikulenko, this detachment, over 100 men, launched a suicidal attack. Their task seemed simple: break through to the SMK, hook it with cables, and drag it out of no man's land. But the Finnish troops were ready. When the Soviet tanks and infantry advanced 150 meters, they walked into a prepared killing zone. Finnish artillerymen and machine gunners, having zeroed in on this sector perfectly, opened up with devastating point-blank fire. Shells and bullets cut down the riflemen trying to take cover behind the T-28's light armor, which themselves began to burn from hits. Within minutes, the operation turned into a slaughter. Having lost nearly half their personnel killed and wounded, Captain Nikolenko gave the order to retreat. 47 men paid their lives and health for the attempt to recover a motionless heap of metal. And the SMK remained standing in its crater. It stood there all winter, turning into a strange frost and rust-covered monument in no man's land. Finnish soldiers occasionally visited it, pried off hatches, blew holes in the floor out of curiosity or vandalism, but they didn't seriously study the complex machine. They had other concerns. Meanwhile, its modest single-turreted brother, the KV tank, was undergoing its own baptism by fire with astonishing success. Its compactness, maneuverability, and equally powerful armor proved ideal. Just 2 days after the SMK's demise, on December 19, 1939, the State Defense Committee made an unprecedentedly swift decision to adopt the KV tank into service. The fate of the multi-turreted giants was sealed. At the end of February 1940, after the breakthrough of the Mannerheim Line, their own forces were finally able to approach the forgotten SMK. To pull the 55-ton mangled giant from the crater required 6 T-28 tanks pulling it simultaneously. In disassembled form, the remains of the SMK were delivered to the Kirov plant. Engineers examined it and delivered a dry, final verdict. Restoration was not feasible. The costly experiment was over. The hull, into which so much effort had been poured, was ultimately sent to be scrapped. But the main question remained: why did a machine with such powerful armor and armament suffer such a crushing and rapid failure? The answer, as is often the case, lay not in chance, but in the very essence of the project.
The paradox of the SMK was that its main, seemingly innovative feature, the 2 turrets, became the cause of its demise. Its layout fashionable in the 1930s, in practice spawned a whole host of fatal problems that rendered the Titan helpless. Firstly, the two turrets, placed one behind the other, stretched the tank's hull to a monstrous length, almost 10 meters. It made it resemble an armored train, not a tank. On the battlefield, such a behemoth couldn't turn quickly. Its turning radius was enormous, making it an ideal target for artillery and robbing it of tactical flexibility. Secondly, it created an insoluble control problem. The commander in the main turret had to simultaneously observe the battlefield, select targets for two different guns, give commands to two gunners, and coordinate the actions of all 7 crew members. In real combat conditions, amidst smoke, noise, and cramped quarters, this led to chaos and a paralysis of firepower. While the commander worked with one turret, the other was idle. Thirdly, the great length meant great vulnerability. The area of the hull floor most susceptible to mines and high explosive charges was colossal. This was proven by the fateful Finnish charge on December 19th. It was impossible to protect the tank from such a threat. Fourthly, all this complexity added tons of dead weight with no real gain. The extra turret, its mechanisms, ammunition, and crew members weighed down the vehicle, overloaded the running gear and engine, offering no tactical superiority in return. The starkest contrast was the KV tank. With similar armor thickness and the same main gun, it was 2 meters shorter, 8 tons lighter, operated by a crew of 5, and incomparably more maneuverable. Its success in the same war was logical and immediate. It proved that the future did not lie in complex multi-purpose monsters, but with simple, balanced, and technologically refined machines where every decision is subordinated to a single goal: effectiveness in battle. The story of the SMK is not just a tale of one unsuccessful tank. It is a monument to an entire era in tank building that ended in the 1930s, and a harsh lesson that in military technology, excessive complexity and the pursuit of impressive specs on paper almost always lead to a costly and useless failure.